Hi everyone, my name is Damien. I'm working as a senior technical support engineer. My main focus is integration, API, and authentication, and I've been working with Qlik since 2013. So today we're going to talk about integrating SAML with Qlik Sense Enterprise on Windows. Here is our agenda. The first part would be the authentication overview, so the different parties that are involved and the workflow. Then we're going to talk about the prerequisite for successful deployment. End to end, we are going to talk about troubleshooting common issues. So first of all, why do we need to use SAML? So SAML allows to perform single sign-on authentication, and that's the protocol that is supported in Qlik Sense for Windows. So we can have the same identity provider that we use connected with SAML on Qlik Sense Enterprise for Windows, and we can connect that same identity provider to Qlik Sense Enterprise for Kubernetes or Qlik Sense Cloud Services with the OpenID Connect protocol. So today we're going to focus on integrated SAML with Qlik Sense for Windows. So the first part is the authentication overview. Here are the involved parties in the SAML authentication. So Qlik provides SAML as a service provider. So this is Qlik Sense Enterprise for Windows. And the customer can choose which identity provider they want to use. So Qlik Sense always acts as a SAML service provider, and the customer get to choose what they want to use for the identity provider. So in this presentation, in some occasion, we will abbreviate service provider to SP and identity provider to IDP. So there are two kinds of authentication workflow that you can have when you use SAML. The first one is service provider initiated authentication. So first, the user will go to the Qlik proxy. Then the Qlik proxy will redirect the user to the identity provider so that they can authenticate. And then the identity provider will send the users back to the Qlik proxy with the SAML response. And Qlik Sense will validate this SAML response and create a session so the user can stay authenticated until the session ends or times out. So all the request goes through the client. There's no direct request between the service provider and the identity provider. Both of the identity provider and the service provider must be accessible from the client. Another thing to keep in mind is that Qlik Sense only accepts a sign assertion in an unsigned SAML response. If you put a signature on the response directly, that will just be ignored. So the second type of authentication workflow is the identity provider initiated authentication. So in this case, the user will go directly to the identity provider to authenticate. Then once they authenticate on the identity provider page, they will see a list of applications that they have access to. Among those, they will see the Qlik Sense application. So when they click on the Qlik Sense icon, then the identity provider will redirect the user together with the SAML response to Qlik Sense. And then in the same way as the SP-initiated authentication, Qlik Sense will validate the SAML response and create the session in Qlik Sense, and the user can stay authenticated until that session ends or times out. The SAML assertions is the one that always needs to be signed when it is IDP initiated. The second part that we are going to go through is the prerequisite for successful deployment. So first of all, we're going to talk about the supported protocols for SAML request and response. So the SAML request, which is the request that the service provider sends to the identity provider. So in Qlik Sense, we only support HTTP redirect for the SAML request. The SAML response, which is the response that the identity provider will send to the service provider. In Qlik Sense, we support both HTTP post and HTTP redirect for the SAML response. However, we only support the signature on the SAML assertion, and we will ignore anything else that is signed. So in the identity provider metadata, you can easily check what protocols are supported. You just need to check the single sign-on service tag, and you can see if you have HTTP redirect or HTTP post. Another prerequisites, signatures and encryption. So in SAML, you can sign and or encrypt a response. So in Qlik Sans, the authentication requests have to be signed. You cannot choose to not sign it. The SAML message, which is also called SAML response, so it cannot be signed. Even if it's signed, Qlik Sans will just ignore the signature. And then you have the SAML assertion, which can be signed and can also be encrypted. So the signature are ignored on the SAML message. If the assertion is not signed, which is also an option to just not sign the assertion, then in the IDP metadata, you should not indicate any signing certificate. And another prerequisite also is that if it is not signed, then you must go on an HTTPS connection. So if you try to use HTTP connection, you will get an error in the log that says that unsigned SAML assertion is only supported on secure connections. So we're gonna go through the different setups that we have on the virtual proxy for the SAML authentication. First of all, the SAML host URI, which is the URL of the Qlik Sans server. Secondly, we have the SAML entity ID, which can be any string. It doesn't have to be an URI. Then the SAML IDP metadata. So that's the metadata that you retrieve from the identity provider, and then you need to upload it here on the virtual proxy. Then we have the SAML attribute for the user ID, so which claim you want to use as your username in Qlik Sans. Then we have the SAML attribute for the user directory, so you can use either a claim from the identity provider as you would do for the user ID, or you can also use a static string, which we do in this case. Just put it in square bracket and you can use a static string for the user directory. And then we have the SAML attribute mappings. So those are some claims that you can optionally send in a SAML response, and you can map them here, and you can check so if they are mandatory or not. So if you check that they are mandatory, if Qlik Sans does not receive that specific claim in the SAML response, then the authentication will just fail with 400 error. All of these fields are mandatory except for the SAML attribute mapping. So if it's not checked that it's mandatory, then it's just gonna be optional. So if you don't send those claims in your response, then you won't get any error. So now we're gonna talk about troubleshooting some common issues in Qlik Sans when it comes to use SAML. So the information needed for the troubleshooting, first of all, so the most common error that you would see when you're trying to set up SAML would be the error 400 or error 500. So those are the two very common errors, which are some generic error in the UI, and you will need to go to the log at that time and check what is the errors it is actually happening. So that's also important to note at which point, which timing that error is occurring. Is that before the redirection to the identity provider occurs, or is it after the redirection to the identity provider occurs and the identity provider redirects to Qlik Sans? So in the first case, that's usually something that is wrong in the IDP metadata. So that's either that HTTP redirect endpoint is not set up for the single sign-on URL, or that can also be that there's a problem with a certificate and that Qlik Sans is not able to sign the authentication request. So if it happens after the IDP redirects to Qlik Sans, that's usually that there's something wrong inside the SAML response. In that case, we also gonna check the logs, the proxy logs, and it will tell us why this request failed. So there are different common messages, such as missing attributes for the user ID, or SAML assertion was not signed with the certificate that was provided. So that means that there's a mismatch in the certificate that you have provided in your IDP metadata and the one that has signed the assertion. And another common one is also the IDP failed the authentication. In that case, it means that the IDP has not, as the message says, has not succeeded to authenticate the user, and you would need to check the logs on the IDP side to see what happens. So here are the different information that are useful to troubleshoot a SAML issue. So the errors that is in the browser, the virtual proxy configuration, which identity provider is used, the identity provider metadata, the SAML trace, and the QlikSense proxy logs. The list of this information can be found in this article, and you also have steps on how to collect them. So we're going to go through some common error when setting up SAML. So one of these common error is the certificate that is needed for SHA-256. So usually in the UI you would see an internal error 500 with a QlikSense logo. So first of all, you would need to check the certificate. So when you try to select a SHA-256 in the SAML settings in the virtual proxy, it will, so QlikSense will check automatically if you have applied a third-party certificate, because certificates that are generated by default by QlikSense do not support SHA-256, but that will not check if the cryptographic provider of the certificate is correct. That's usually why this error would occur. You would need to check the certificate, the cryptographic provider. So on this screenshot, we are using the Microsoft tool certutil to check the cryptographic provider of the certificate. So we see that here we have Microsoft RSA S-channel cryptographic provider that is used, which is not the correct cryptographic provider needed for SHA-256. So QlikSense requires a specific cryptographic provider for SHA-256 signature, which is Microsoft Enhanced RSA and AES cryptographic provider. So this requirement only applies to the certificate that is applied on QlikSense and not to the IDP certificate. So there's also a knowledge base article regarding this issue, which is this one, and it explains how you can convert the cryptographic provider to the correct one so that you can use it to have SHA-256 signature in QlikSense for SAML. So another common issue is related to the relay state. So the relay state is a parameter in the SAML protocol, which is used to identify which resource the user tried to access to before he was authenticated. So that will be sent in the SAML request. And in QlikSense, it's in a GUID format when you do a service provider initiated authentication. So this GUID will be mapped in proxy to URL, the URL that the user tried to access. And once the user has completed the authentication, then he will be redirected to this URL. So if that does not match in the SAML request and in SAML response, so for example, if that gets stripped by a reverse proxy or something, a network device, then you would encounter this kind of error. So the relay state is a compulsory parameter when you do service provider initiated authentication in QlikSense. Usually the error that will show up in the log is a SAML get request invalid format. So we have a knowledge base article also regarding this issue, which is this one, and it explains the different cause that this error message can have, including the relay state. So we're gonna have a short demo with QlikSense Enterprise for Windows. We're gonna use the June 2019 version, and as our identity provider, we're gonna use ADFS 4.0, which is the one included in Windows Server 2016. So first of all, we're gonna have a brief view on the settings that we currently have in ADFS. So in ADFS, I have created my relying parties. That is the one that is going to be used for QlikSense. So here are the settings that I have. By default, ADFS will use encryption. In this case, I have disabled encryption, so by removing the certificate that was specified here. I'm still using signature with this certificate specified here. and I'm using SHA-1 in this specific case. In my claim issuance policy, I have specified here that I want to have the user principal name and the display name sent as claims in my SAML response. So now I'm gonna go to the QlikSense server. So first of all, I'm gonna log into my QMC to see what settings I have in the virtual proxy. So here's the virtual proxy that I have created for SAML authentication. So I'm using the user principal name as my username in QlikSense, which I'll specify here. I have specified SHA-1 as a signing algorithm, and I have mapped two attributes, which includes the name, which I have set up as mandatory. So now I'm gonna go through the workflow of the SAML authentication. I'm gonna use Firefox to show this. So first of all, what I have installed here is the SAML tracer, which is an extension, Firefox extension. You also have the same extension for Chrome. So in this extension, you will see the different SAML requests. It will be marked with a SAML icon, so you can easily find them and see what is included in the SAML request and in SAML response. So you can just easily just Google SAML tracer Firefox or SAML tracer Chrome, and you will reach the page of the Chrome store or Firefox store where you can just install this extension. So I'm gonna go to my QlikSense server. So in this case, I'm gonna use that external name here and following by the prefix. So here I get QlikSense is redirecting me to ADFS for authentication. This is the ADFS authentication page where I input my credentials, and after that ADFS is redirecting me to the QlikSense hub. So now I'm authenticated to QlikSense. So here in the SAML tracer, I can see the different requests that came. So you have this one SAML request here. Actually, two of them are getting sent, but you can just ignore the second one because it's the same. It's just IDFS implements SAML. So for the first one, we see the SAML request because we are doing service provider initiated authentication. So we have SAML request here. We can see parameters here. We see a relay state here. We see a signature, and then we have the SAML request in a decoded format here. So this tool will automatically decode it. Then if we go to the SAML response, which is the one that is appended to the redirection when ADFS redirected to QlikSense. So we have much more information in here. So we can see the different part of the response here. So response, we start here, and then we have the assertion that starts from here. And then inside the assertion, you have, so you see that the assertion is assigned. You have a signature value for the assertion, which is what QlikSense will use to validate that this assertion is correct. And you have your different attributes, which is here. So we can see the two different attributes that I have set up in my claim issuance policy. So I have the user principal name and my name, the display name here. So that is all for the demo of how this works. So let's take a look at what happens when things don't work as expected. So now I'm going to try to log in again. So I'm going to also just open the SAML tracer just to get my SAML response in there. So QlikSense has redirected me to the authentication page for ADFS. And I'm inputting my credentials here, logging in, and I'm getting this very common error. So how would I go on troubleshooting this error? So the first thing that needs to be done is to go to the QlikSense log. So you would go to see program data, QlikSense log proxy trace, and inside the trace folder you have the Audit Proxy Log, which is the one that we want to see. So you would usually see this as a warning. So I'm going to search from the bottom. I usually search for SAML because the origin of the error will come from this component here, which is the SAML authentication handler. So here, once I've searched for that, I'm searching for the warning. So what is a warning and what is coming from the SAML authentication handler? So here I can see SAML mandatory attribute with name, and the name of the attribute here is missing. So it's telling me that I'm missing something that I have configured as mandatory in my virtual proxy. So I can easily confirm that also by going to the SAML trace and go to the SAML response here. So here, if I go in the part where you have SAML attributes, so the attribute statement, here you can see that I have two attributes that are sent, and the one that the log is complaining about is not included in the SAML response, and that is why we are getting the error. So you could easily just alter the configuration on ADFS and add that attribute in the claim issuance policy. So we are gonna take a look at another error now. I am going to look into the hub again. Let's make sure to open the SAML tracer so that we get everything overflow. And now I hit enter. So in this case, I get a 500 error. And you should also notice the timing of this error. We didn't get redirected to ADFS at all. So that happened before the authentication even started on the ADFS side. So before QlikSense was able to redirect, we encountered this error 500. So in the same way as the error that we have seen before, we will take a look in the log, the same log that were in. So the Audit Proxy Log in that same folder. So I'm gonna do search in the same way, search from the bottom, and I'm gonna search for SAML. Okay, so in this case, we see that actually this is not returned by the SAML component. What we see here is we have a warning is returned by this component this time because it's related to the signing with the certificate. The reason why we know that it's related to the certificate is that we get a SAML signature exception. So here, when you see this kind of exception, the first thing that you will need to do is to check the certificate. So if you're using SHA-256, you would check the certificate if it has the correct cryptographic provider. So you could just go to the command line and then just do a certutil dump certificate, which so this is the certificate that I have applied on my QlikSense proxy. So here I just input the passwords for my certificate, and here I see in the providers that I don't have the required cryptographic provider, so that is why we are getting the error in this case. Okay, so that was all for the demo part. So a few takeaways from this session. So what you need to remember is that the signature is not supported on the SAML messages. Microsoft Enhanced RSA and AES cryptographic provider is needed for SHA-256 signature. And the error 400, 500, they are generic error messages. You need to check the Qlik proxy log to know what actually happened. The SAML attributes that are mapped in the virtual proxy can be used in the security rules. You can just access them with user.environment.attribute name. However, they're not persisted in the repository, so you won't be able to see it in the user information in the QMC. So that was all for today's session. Now is the Q&A.
Okay, everyone, it's time for Q&A. Please submit your questions through the Q&A panel. Damien, which question would you like to address first?
So we have a question about the workflow, which workflow is best, the IDP-initiated workflow or the SP-initiated workflow, which one is more secure? So it's not really about which one is more secure, it's how you want to make it easy for the user to access the application. So when you do SP-initiated, so the user just access an URL on the Qlik server and get redirected to the IDP, and when the authentication is done, then he just gets redirected to that URL that he was trying to access. While if you do an IDP initiated, then the user will just log into the IDP, and then he will have to select the Qlik application from a list of applications, and then he will have to search for which app he wants to open, which setting he wants to open. So it's much more clicks for the user. We have a second question, which is regarding do you have to use HTTPS when using SAML? So that is not as per se a requirement to use HTTPS when using SAML, but in some case you will have to use HTTPS for SAML. For example, if you choose to not sign your SAML response, then in that case you will get an error message in the Qlik log that says that unsigned SAML response are only supported on HTTP on secure connection, so HTTPS. We have another question, which is regarding do you have any blogs in resolving the errors that occurs while integrating with SAML with Qlik? So we don't have a blog for it, but we have the knowledge base, the support knowledge base, which I will share. So we have the knowledge base here, so you could just go to support.qlik.com, search for SAML and, for example, the error that you're getting, and you would get a list of content here. So you have the opportunity to search on all the content, which means the help side, the community, and the support articles that we have. Or you can just search for only the support article, which are most around troubleshooting methods here. So we have a lot of articles regarding SAML. So if you just check in your logs which error you are getting, then you should be able to search it here and see if we have an article regarding the error. We have another question which is regarding, do you have any guide on how to integrate Qlik with SAML and Azure? So there is one guide that was posted by Qlik on the Microsoft website. So if you just go to Google and just Google Qlik SAML and Azure, you will find this page, which is a guide step-by-step on how you can configure SAML with Azure. So we have the different steps here, virtual proxy setup. So you can just go to this page and you have the whole procedure on how to set it up. We have another question, which is where can we find more info regarding setting up ADFS? For that specific use case, we have a guide in the knowledge base regarding, so there's a few ones here. This one is quite good. So it's a step-by-step. That's also talking about reverse proxy. You can, but if you just don't use a reverse proxy, you can just put the server name instead. That's not a big difference. And here you have all the steps on how to set it up. There is another question regarding can we integrate Qlik Sense with Qlik and OAuth? So OAuth is not supported in Qlik Sense, so you have to use SAML to integrate with Qlik, and Qlik is supporting SAML. I haven't done that setting myself, but in theory that should work. There is another question which is regarding, is there a way to disable the default proxy so that it goes to SAML rather than Windows Authentication by default? So there's no way to disable or to delete the default virtual proxy, but what you can do instead is that you can change the prefix. So what you will have to do first is you will have to add a prefix on the default virtual proxy, because you cannot have two virtual proxies that do not have a prefix. So the first step is to add a prefix on the default virtual proxy, which is using Windows Authentication. And once you have done that and applied, then the next step will be to remove the prefix that you have on your SAML virtual proxy. And in that case, when you just type your server name without any virtual proxy prefix, then it will land on the SAML authentication by default.
Okay, Damien, we have time for one last question.
Okay, we have one question which is regarding why do you need to disable the signing certificate revocation check if you get error 400? So I suppose this question is mainly about ADFS. So the reason why you need to do that is, especially if you're using the default certificate that is provided with Qlik Sense, that is a self-signed certificate. And what ADFS will do is that it will check if that certificate is valid, and as it is self-signed, then it won't be able to validate that certificate. So the authentication will just fail. So that's why you need to disable the signing certificate revocation check. So if you have a third-party certificate applied on the Qlik Sense proxy, and that is a trusted certificate delivered by your domain certificate authority or by a public certificate authority, then you won't have to do that that step of disabling the certificate revocation check. Okay, so that was the last question. Thank you everyone for attending.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you to Damien for presenting. We always appreciate getting experts like Damien to share with us. Here's our legal disclaimer. And thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day.